5 years ago, there was a viral tweet from user Just Sally that read, "A man waved at me, so I waved back at him. But apparently he was waving at a woman behind me, so I kept my hand up and stopped a taxi to get out of the awkward situation, and it took me to the airport. I am now in Poland, starting my new life." The reason this tweet went viral is because it's so human. Good comedy can serve to peel away at the layers of our protection to uncover the rather pathetic and real thoughts and feelings that we have beneath the well put together exterior that we show to the world. And today we're going to be learning a bit more about how the layers of our mind work. As humans, we have this image and projection of ourselves as a rational person who makes well-considered decisions, and we quickly forget about the amount of times that we've panicked about losing our keys just to find them in our hands, or those times where we text the complete wrong person without checking who we are actually texting, or yes, of course, we forget about those times that we wave excitedly at someone that we've never met and then feel rather stupid. It's time to dig into Daniel Kahneman's concept of thinking fast and slow, what he calls System 1 and System 2 thinking. When we do important things like choosing a job, or deciding how to spend our next half an hour, or every time that we buy something, we like to think that we have considered the relevant factors, that we're making the optimal choices in our life. But the reality is that we are completely riddled with biases, and we ignore the data that we just don't see. And there is a reason for it. We have different systems of thinking that are optimized for just getting along in the world at the optimal level of our brain's processing power, that we don't have to constantly think about everything and can just automate as much as possible. We are essentially a judgment-making machine, and Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for his work on our systems of thinking and how we can fix some of our greatest vulnerabilities. So we're going to learn all about System 1 thinking and System 2 thinking, of course, and then how they apply to our biases, as well as the concept of prospect theory, how we compute risk, and what we can learn about happiness from all of this. So, hello and welcome to The Growth Mindset with me, Sam Webster Harris. I just want to quickly flag that if you are a long-time listener of the show, you will know that last year I did a whole season on cognitive biases, including this episode. As each episode of that season took me so long to write, the season itself was spread out over several months with lots of unrelated episodes in between them, which admittedly made it a very hard season to follow. However, it was a season I was immensely proud of, and I've always wanted these episodes to be together in one place. Right now, I happen to be moving house and country, and I have some hospital stuff to deal with, a meditation retreat to go on, and I'm doing family stuff. So it seemed like a good opportunity to finally release these episodes in a single coherent season in the correct order, as they were always meant to be. The book Thinking Fast and Slow is truly epic and deserves a Nobel Prize, but it is also thick as hell and one of the books I most hear people buy and then never quite actually read. Let's say it's often in the want to have done pile, but not so often in the want to actually do pile. And with that, it is my pleasure to give you everything you actually need to know. It is a big episode today, covering some really important fundamental parts of how your brain works and psychology, so please stay tuned. So, starting at the start with System 1 and System 2 thinking and what they actually are. We can detect sadness in a voice, read words on a billboard, or tell that one object is further away than another object. These are all going on in System 1 without you actively putting any conscious thought into it. It just happens. System 1, or fast thinking, operates automatically, quickly, with little to no effort. It happens in our subconscious mind without a real sense of voluntary control. System 2, however, is a lot more effortful. It takes a lot of resources, it's intense. Because of that, System 2, or slow thinking, only allocates attention to activities that really need it. You put effort into finding Wally in Where's Wally, perhaps when you're reverse parking or multiplying 237 by 43. We have a much more subjective experience of System 2. It's associated with feelings of concentration, deliberate choice, and that lovely thing we call consciousness. In fact, even trying to maintain exercise at a faster pace than you're used to takes conscious effort, and you have to keep on reminding yourself to run faster. And I can relate to this example because if I'm not thinking about my speed of running, I just go at such a slow plod, and it's very frustrating. But anyway, how does system 1 and 2 work together? System 1 doesn't stop, like ever. Just automatically comes up with suggestions and feelings or intuitions, and it then gives these intuitions to system 2. System 2 doesn't see any obvious errors. It just goes, yeah, fine, and whatever it was that system 1 thought becomes a belief, and these impulses can be turned into actions. As I've said, system 1 operates very involuntary. For example, you can't unsee optical illusions even if you know they're wrong. Or if I say 1 plus 1, you know the answer is 2 as easily as you know that gooey brownies are delicious. At this point, you might be wondering, why do we need a system 2 when you could just spend the rest of our lives eating gooey brownies and doing simple mathematics and being really bad at Where's Wally, because we're bad at it anyway. And I know, life isn't fair. But sadly, even with our system 2 mode of thinking, we're still pretty flawed. But if system 1 was left alone, it would do a lot more dumber stuff. And why is this? When we're faced with a difficult question, system 1 substitutes a much easier question, or heuristic as it's called. And sometimes the answers are okay, but a lot of the times they aren't. Let's say you are trying to do some sensible investing and you're buying a stock. The important question to answer for whether you should buy a company's stock is if it's worth buying. Is the stock likely to go up or down in the time frame that you are planning to invest? Does the stock fit into a balanced set of your investing portfolio, your investing thesis? And these are all some difficult questions to answer. But instead, there is an easier question that system 1 uses, and that is, how much do I like this company? If you've always preferred JetBlue to Spirit Airlines, then you're going to buy JetBlue. If you like Elon Musk and Tesla, you're going to buy some Tesla stock. If you think Jeff Bezos is silly and Amazon is terrible, you're not going to buy any Amazon. And now let's talk about trying to understand a difficult question like, how happy are you with your life? This could send our system 2 on quite a spin, but instead, system 1 jumped to the rescue with a very simplified question about your current mood. If you're not happy right now, then your life is kind of bad. If you are happy now, then you probably have a good life. It's not completely accurate, but it's easy to extrapolate. And I'm sure you can relate to often when we're on holiday, we can feel like we have a great sense of balance in our life, distance from our work. And then next week, back at work, when we're snowed under by the flood of emails, we're like, oh my God, I don't have any life balance. I hate everyone and everything. And I'm so unhappy. Yes, system 1, hey? In fact, system 1's propensity for silly heuristics is a huge part of politics. Instead of asking how truthful a political candidate is or considering the policies they stand for, the way they treat others, system 1 mainly judges what the politician looks like. Are they a good-looking person, or do they seem powerful? And we vote based on vibes rather than details. So in all these examples that we've spoken about, system 2 does have the chance to reject these imperfect answers. But a lazier system 2 often just endorses a heuristic simplified answer without giving it a lot of scrutiny. There are only so many things that we can put a lot of conscious effort into after all. So we do just let a lot of things slide, and we have no concept of all the different mistakes we're making. If I told you that a bat and a ball together cost $1.10 and the bat is $1 more than the ball, how much do you think the ball is? I'll give you a second to ponder. The bat and ball together cost $1.10 and the bat is $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Most people are going to say, yeah, the ball, 10 cents. The bat's $1 more than the ball, easy. That's your system 1 giving an answer and system 2 giving a quick scan and being like, yeah, seems fine. But if your system 2 was going to be not lazy, it would bother to add $1 to the 10-cent ball, and it would find that the bat must cost $1.10 And if you add then the ball 10 cents to the bat, that would make that $1.20 total, which is not right because you only have $1.10 total for the bat and the ball. And what you actually find is that the ball cost 5 cents and the bat is $1.05. And then you add them together and you get $1.10 as the total. So the ball is not 10 cents. And that's very easy for your system to work out. Like a 6-year-old can add 100 to 10. But the reason that we fail is because it looks even easier than it is, and we just assume that we've already got it right when we haven't. And this is something we do in many areas of life. We just assume that the easiest, most simple answer to something is the right answer, and we move on, even if it isn't the right answer. And as I mentioned earlier, how this can affect politics, and politicians actually often use our propensity for simplicity for their own benefit. They'll ask us simplified questions to answer like, do you want your borders to become a shuttle service for terrorists and giving them jobs and healthcare? Which you obviously don't, and your system one will answer, hell no, I don't want that. And it conveniently sidesteps the fact that there's no politicians out there who are planning to give terrorist jobs and dismantle all forms of investigation into terrorists or let everyone across your border. And yet countries all over Europe, Britain, America have politicians that say this, and it doesn't really make any sense when you look into it. And we can think of System 1 like a bit of an opinionated teenager. System 1, it just thinks it's always right about topics it doesn't even have any experience in. And in fact, like that's not that bad an analogy. Your brain is still developing until your late 20s, and it's the prefrontal part of the cerebral cortex that reaches its maturity last. And what does that part of the brain do? It does things like planning, prioritizing, and making good decisions. So all the things that your System 2 handles are the things that you haven't fully developed when you're a teenager. So I'm not bashing teenagers for no reason here. They genuinely do have a worse System 2. But before we get too into generalizations, there are certainly some teenagers out there that have much better System 2 thinkings than many adults. And it would be System 1 of me to judge all teenagers because that would be stupid. What's more important is that if your System 2 isn't working very well, then the more convinced you will be that your System 1 fast thinking part of your brain is correct, even when it isn't. Okay, so now we have a good grounding of when the fast and slow parts of our brain are working and what they do. As we've been covering in the series on cognitive biases, there's lots of shortcuts that your brain makes that are all System 1 heuristics, and they pass through System 2's blind spots. I'm going to quickly cover the most impactful cognitive biases as a refresh on where they fall in System 1 and System 2 thinking. After that, we'll dig into a few varied examples of things we haven't spoken about that are some mega quirks of our thinking, and I'll expand those points a little bit for us where we can see how people and organizations fall into System 1 thinking before we'll then move on to prospect theory and happiness, as I've mentioned. So due to the System 1 fast thinking wanting to rely on heuristics, that leads to systematic deviations from just rationality. And some of these common biases include first, the anchoring effect, which is where we rely too heavily on the first piece of information that we encounter when we make decisions. Even retail agents who say they don't get affected during a house price negotiation are provably swayed by the anchor effect of the initial listing price of a house. Then we have the availability heuristic, where we overestimate the likelihood of events based on the availability of them in our memory. So if we listen to the news a lot and we hear about terrorists or plane crashes, those things are going to feel a lot more likely to us than much more real things like the fact that you're going to know a lot of people who will die from asthma attacks and car crashes, but those things aren't in the news a lot, so we don't really worry about them that much or think that they're a problem or change any of our life decisions or voting preferences based on policies around them. Then we have the confirmation bias, where we seek and interpret information that confirms what we already believe. If you think that your ex is a douche, you might find content about narcissists that describe them and confirm your suspicion that they really are a douche. Or, if you struggle at concentrating, you might find content that tells you that you have ADHD, and it's not your fault. Or a very common one is that if you're affiliated with one political party, you'll find it very easy to explain whatever the problem of the day is as being due to the actions on the other side. Finally, we have the overconfidence bias, where we overestimate our own ability and the accuracy of our knowledge. We'll assume that our tiny 1% knowledge of the entire world is more like 99% knowledge. And we might have these strange beliefs like we'll think that we live in the best country in the world when we have no idea what it's like to live in any of the other countries. Or we might think we're making a good investment when we choose a stock that we like, even though we have no idea what the status of policy changes are going to be for important legal matters that affect that company, or we have no idea what the economy will be like next year, or how the management of that company works, and we probably don't even know what their business plan is. So how would we really know if we're making a good investment? We don't. We just believe we do. The good news is that System 2, our slower, more rational thinking, can correct a lot of these biases, but it does require effort, significant effort, and awareness to build a habit to counteract them. So I would recommend listening to the other episodes in the series on cognitive biases if you want to dig into the specifics of each bias. And one of my favorite stories from Daniel Kahneman, who discovered this, was that he realized that he had a lot of trouble saying no to people, and his calendar would get filled with meetings and requests on his times that he didn't always want. So he created a hard rule that he would just never allow himself to agree to anything on the day. However nice a conversation he was having with someone, even if it was a good friend, he forbid himself from saying yes to any commitment whilst he was in the moment. He would only respond to an invitation for anything the next day after he had had a night's sleep, some distance from the person, and could review his agenda, the other projects he was trying to work on, and rationally consider the commitment versus all of the other commitments that he had. This is a really good example of just blocking your System 1 initial thoughts to let System 2 have time to actually attack a problem properly. It's so easy to commit to stuff in the moment that in a few weeks' time, we're going to be like, oh man, I really don't have time for this. I wish I hadn't said yes. And I think that a good addition to this rule is that if you're being asked about a meeting or event and you wouldn't go to it today, then you shouldn't commit to doing it even if it's in 6 months, because you're still going to feel busy on that day in 6 months' time. And you should only be doing the things in 6 months' time that you'd be just as excited to do if they were today. Moving on, I said that we would dig into some of the bigger thinking quirks that we haven't spoken about yet on the podcast, so stay tuned for after the break. I said that we would dig into some of the bigger thinking quirks that we haven't spoken about yet on the podcast, and I always find it interesting how innately bad humans are with numbers. We see this with simple concepts like compounding, and today we're going to talk about a few things. The first is called the law of large numbers, and that's where data from large sample sizes represent reality and truth much better than from small sample sizes. That's, of course, why lots of science requires a large sample size to be considered true. Yet even scientists, non-profits, and very sensible people will still make mistakes here. In one example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation looked at statistics of schools that outperformed the average, that all the top performing schools were smaller schools. Well, they thought this was a brilliant finding. They assumed that it must be due to small class sizes and increased student contact time with teachers, and wouldn't that change the world if everybody had something like that? So they put millions of dollars into trying to recreate these conditions in larger schools, but there was no provable benefit from them doing this. They forgot that large schools with lots of pupils will just have the average for general intelligence because of there's so many pupils there. If you have 1,000 large schools in a data set, they're all going to be quite close together in terms of how they perform because they each represent average intelligence quite well. But if you have 1,000 small schools, there's going to be a lot more variety in the levels of performance. Because with a class of 10 pupils, you're going to have some classes where 10 pupils can all flunk an exam, and you're going to have some schools where 10 pupils all get straight A's. And so when we think of System 1, it's really seeking the easy explanation that fits our worldview. Small schools have small class sizes, makes sense, don't need to do any further checking with my System 2, so let's go improve the world by funding things to act like small schools. Woohoo! Yeah, it didn't actually work. And you'll see the exact same problem happened with a study on kidney cancer, for example. They had lots of data from different areas across South America. They found that all the lowest rates of kidney cancer were in rural areas. And you might logically presume that it could be something to do with the cleaner air or the connection to nature, something in the water. System 1 can easily see how living in a rural area could give a good health outcome. But if you look at the data, all of the worst places for kidney cancer that you could live are, you probably guessed it by this point, they are rural areas as well. And again, you could also quickly come up with some logical explanations, perhaps increased poverty in rural areas, the high-fat diet, perhaps being a long way from hospitals and not being treated so regularly. These are some easy explanations for why being in a rural area would have bad health outcomes. But we can't have it both ways. Living in rural areas can't both prevent and cause kidney cancer. In fact, it's nothing to do with the lifestyle choices and where you live, as such as it is just population sizes that are causing these areas to show up as good or bad. By pure random chance, some rural areas will have a spike of kidney cancer because that is just statistics. So in fact, we see that System 1 in fast thinking is a big reason why we are so bad at comprehending data and numbers. We can try a different thought experiment. Imagine a lovely guy called David. He is quite meek, he's quiet, he keeps to himself. Is David more likely to be a librarian or a construction worker? And it seems obvious to say librarian, right? Well, no, wrong. There are 10 times more construction workers than there are librarians, and most of the librarians are women. Statistically, you are just going to have a lot more quiet male construction workers on the planet than there are total librarians. But we forget the numbers and we go with stories. Or let's imagine you see a smartly dressed lady on the train reading the New York Times. Is she more likely to have a PhD or no degree at all? And you'd want to say she has a PhD because it feels right. But if you consider that only 1.2% of Americans have a PhD, and yet 60% of Americans who are over 25 don't even have a degree, well, this lady is way more likely to not have a degree than she is to have a PhD. So at this point, we could go on to review all the different cognitive biases, but that would be very excessive considering that I've covered 30 different cognitive biases on the show. At this point, we're going to charge forwards into the world of prospect theory, which is where Daniel Kahneman won his Nobel Prize, and it covers how we consider risk and why System 1 and System 2 messes this all up for us. And I'm going to explain it like I'm a 5-year-old. Imagine you have a big, yummy cookie. If somebody wanted to take a tiny piece of your cookie, you might feel really sad, right? Even if it's just a weeny piece. You just don't like losing bits of your cookie. But if you found a tiny piece of another cookie, you might be happy. But the happy you would feel wouldn't be as much as the sad you feel when you lose a piece of your own cookie. So you actually care a lot about not losing even a little bit of what you have. And now that I've made that sound childish, I do think I'll find it difficult to look at people that can't share food in the same way again. Well, besides a lesson on sharing your food and not coming across like a toddler, because adults do share things, don't we? We are also going to learn about the concept of rationality when it comes to things like risk and possessions. In behavioral economics, there's a thing called utility theory, where we should choose the option that's most useful to us based on the chances of different outcomes. And we should do that all very logically. But that really isn't true, and the concrete value of an item also doesn't turn into the same utility for two different people, and they don't value it in the same way. Let's say Anthony has $1 million and Beth has $4 million. Anthony gains $1 million and now has $2. Beth loses $2 million and she now has $2 million. They should both now be as happy as the other. They have the same outcome. They got $2 million in their bank account. $2 million is worth the same. They should be equally happy, but they clearly aren't. Anthony just doubled his wealth. Beth halved her wealth. So the utility and the amount of happiness it gives us depends on the change from our current reference point. The utility of $2 million is actually attached to the changes of wealth to get there, rather than the specific state of being someone with $2 million. I think we know that logically going from $100 to $200 is a much better improvement than going from $900 to $1,000. We just don't notice that extra $100 so much. Perhaps you are expecting a really good raise at your job, like a 20% raise, because you've done so well. It's been hinted that it's going to be a big one, and instead you get a small raise, and you feel really let down and kind of crushed. The reason you feel so bad is you expected something better than when you got, so you felt a loss, even though you technically just had a salary raise. So reference points and our expectations around reference points are very important. And these are all system 1 fast thinking rather than system 2 looking at the much bigger picture of things. And besides reference points, there's another really strange aspect of prospect theory, and that's how our perception of numbers changes with different scales. As we've already learned, our thinking can get a bit wacky when we talk about numbers, and it's about to get even wackier. You're probably familiar with the idea that we can overweight a small chance of an event happening. Like we might fantasize about the very small chance of winning the lottery or gambling in general. Equally, we could obsess over terrible events happening, like our kid getting attacked when they go out or a nuclear disaster happening. Very, very unlikely, but we'll think about it way more than we need to. In general, we just hate small chances of anything going wrong, and there is a disproportionate amount of money to be made, reducing risks not a little bit, but by reducing risks entirely. No one pays like 1/3 for the price of their insurance to only be covered half the days. We want to be covered all the days, 100%. And on this scale, we only care about like binary values. And there's a good reason that we like to think about things in the binary way, because of when we start getting into probabilities, this is when things go all very skewy for us. We just don't seem to make decisions properly. As I've said, binary we can deal with so well. If something has 0% probability or 100% probability, we treat it as it is, like rational human beings. But in between these two certainties of probabilities, the scale for what we actually do goes all over the place in terms of the decisions we'll actually make compared to the statistics of what choices we should be making. At a 1% chance of something occurring, people will treat that from a utilitarian viewpoint as if it was a 5% chance, whilst if there was a 99% chance of something happening, we instead treat it like it's got more of a 90% chance. Those are some numbers, but I'll give them some feeling. Imagine you have a 99% chance of a success in a surgery. There's still a little bit of doubt. It feels more like a 90% chance for some stupid reason. And so we will err on the side of caution. We don't like that little edge of something going wrong. In the same way, imagine there is a 1% chance of a permanent disability in a surgery. That feels really bad. And we treat it 5 times worse than it actually is in terms of the decisions that we'll make to take a surgery, even if it will give us much better life outcomes the rest of the time. Now, besides looking towards the edges probability like 1% and 99%, let's look more down the middle of the chance scale, a 50-50 chance of an event happening. Surely we might be able to think about 50-50 rationally as it is. No. In fact, we view a 50-50% chance as a 42% chance, which seems like madness. But when you think about our emotions and our dislike of loss, it sort of makes sense. If you imagine a coin toss, 50-50 heads or tails, and if I say heads, I will give you $1, or tails, I will take away $1, so you lose, it doesn't feel like a great bet to be making, even though you have a 50-50 chance of winning or losing, and it's overall much, much better odds than playing the lottery or playing with a slot machine. But a 50% chance of losing $1 or 50% chance of winning $1 just seems inherently kind of bad, and we don't like it. And so we judge it more like a 40% chance. Now, I could easily go on for like another 20 minutes on this and stupid things we do with numbers, especially how we can frame risk-seeking behaviors versus loss-averse behaviors. But it's going to get a lot deeper on statistics, and I think I've used too many numbers already, so I shall move on to the topic of happiness. Some of the most useful findings that Daniel Kahneman worked on from his insights on thinking fast and slow were how to then use them to foster happiness and deeper satisfaction, or as I just misspelt the word, statisfaction, which sounds like fate telling me that I should actually talk more about my secret obsessions with maths and statistics, but it's probably just a sign that I can't spell and that there is no such thing as fate. Happiness in general is a confusing concept. There is the in-the-moment happiness. Then there is the overall feeling of well-being. Or to state it more simply, there's happiness we experience and there's happiness we remember. And Daniel Kahneman presents these as our two selves, the experiencing self who feels pleasure and pain in the moment-to-moment of our lives, and then there is the remembering self, the person who reflects on past experiences and tries to evaluate just how happy the experience was. Now, the remembering self might seem more distant from reality, but the remembering self is a huge part of our thinking and our personality. After any single moment in your life has passed, like each microsecond as it's happening, once that's gone, it is only the remembering self that keeps that past alive. And because of this, it's our remembering self that often makes lots of our decisions because it wants to feel a certain way in retrospect, perhaps more so than in the moment. And a really important thing to pick up here is how there's a big difference in how the experiencing self and how the remembering self rate their experiences. The experiencing self can only rate things in the moment as they happen, but the remembering self has two big differences. It has a thing called the peak end rule, where it doesn't actually care so much about the average of the experience or the different feelings you had at different moments. It actually cares about the moment of peak intensity of a feeling, if something felt really bad or really good during an event, and it forgets most of the middle average feelings or bits of boredom. It also cares about the ending of the experience. Did it end on a high note? Did it end with a good taste? Or did it end with some fear or sadness? Like the series Game of Thrones went really down in so many people's ratings because the ending was bad. Even though it was the most raved about show that's ever happened through its entire experience, people loved it up until that point, but it ended badly, so people stopped caring about it. Whereas Breaking Bad is the top-rated TV show ever because it ended so well and it built up to this incredible ending. And I personally would argue that Breaking Bad was one season too long. I just felt like season 4 dragged a bit. They were repeating some of the same stories, and I think that's why they realized they had to resolve everything and ended it. And they did manage to bring it together really well. Hence, it became the most loved TV show ever. But TV aside, a restaurant that lets you leave with a free mint or a fancy hotel that sees you off with a celebration, they are optimizing for the peak end rule. What's also weird about our remembering self is that it has kind of little care for the duration of an event, and all those average moments that are happening, they kind of blur out. And this is one point of why variety is important in life, because similarity of things just get forgotten. Okay, now that we've covered what the difference is, we can investigate how they affect our behaviors. We often feel like in society we are very distracted these days and we're weak-minded, and this is evidence that we are clearly at the mercy of our experiencing self. But actually, it's our remembering self that's making a lot of the decisions. If you book a holiday, that's because you want to remember it. Imagine you went on a holiday, you ticked off the biggest dream on your bucket list. You saw Machu Picchu, or you swam with dolphins, or you went to Lego World. Whatever it is that floats your boat, I'm not judging you. Anyway, you have this holiday. It was amazing. You didn't even have to pay for it. It was free. But at the end, you had to take a pill, and that pill made you forget the entire holiday, and there are no photos. Would you go on this holiday? Well, for most people, it's a no, because it may as well have been someone else on that trip. So we find that our memories are an essential part of going on a vacation. In fact, we pay for memories, and that's why we make decisions to do things that we enjoy. And in the other direction, we will do routine, boring things that we forget if people pay us. There are some jobs where it wouldn't be the end of the world if you forgot a few hours or even a few weeks from your memory. And in fact, in repetitive jobs, that happens a lot. I was a lifeguard for 4 years when I was a teenager, and most of the staring at the pool, counting people, scanning for unhealthy or stupid people, that went straight in my memory trash bin, never to be retrieved again. So if it's the remembering self that is making some of these decisions, what can we learn from that? Well, Stay tuned to find out after the break. As we've learned, a lot of the decisions we make for pleasure are to do with the remembering self rather than the in the moment self. And Daniel Kahneman says that we should actually try to weight the experiencing self more and think about ways we can just make our day-to-day life slightly better. That's why he has his meeting blocker rule, because he knows he won't be so keen on going to another dinner event or having a meeting in the actual moment when it's supposed to happen, even if his remembering self was excited to add it to his memories. He tells us that we should really prioritize looking at things that provide a moment-to-moment pleasure and diminish moment-to-moment pain. That means things like reducing your commute to work is a huge benefit that many people would genuinely feel an improvement in their life satisfaction if they could reduce it. Another thing would be to make your commute fun, like riding a motorbike, but that is a death wish and I don't recommend it at all, but it is proven to help mental health for the nutters that do it, but so is cycling. Commuting aside, we should all be spending a little more time in active pleasures, like socializing and exercise, which might sound like pain to some of you, but once you get into them, they are mostly a source of pleasure, and you're just going to have to trust me on that. Sorry. The take home is that when we go through our life and just dial up slightly all the everyday little pleasures and have some more free time, have some more community, that makes a big difference to our happiness. And that doesn't mean just giving in to hedonism and eat donuts for breakfast every day. It's definitely more about the healthy pleasures. And now that we've covered that, I'm of course going to counteract that completely with the opposite side of things on the emotion scale, where we do prioritize the experiencing self too much when it comes to things like confronting our fears or doing difficult things. In these cases, it can help much more to prioritize living a life that we will remember. Would you rather be someone who tries and fails and tries again, or would you prefer to be someone that fails to even try at all in the first place and never does anything? When it comes to having an interesting life to look back on, that involves daring to make big leaps and following those crazy ideas or talking to that person or going on that adventure. People on their deathbed regret the things that they didn't do. So, as usual in psychology, we have some highly conflicting advice where the real answer is, of course, it depends. Now, to expand our minds a little, we could visit a Morpheus quote, and he asks, what is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. Well, all our experiences and memories are just some electrical signals in our brain, and the texture of our existence is really based on the interpretation of those signals and the pathways they go through. If a pathway is becoming overused or a default reaction that usually ends with us feeling bad, we can be the curators of our existence to change our inputs or change how we compute them. And this leads us nicely onto the last section of the day that wraps up the episode and happiness, and this is the focusing illusion. As I mentioned earlier, when we try to consider a big, weighty topic like how satisfied am I with my life, it's difficult to weigh it all up accurately. We rely on heuristics like how happy do I feel right now, and we also use the availability bias such as recent or very weighty events that spring to the front of our mind. But we can learn a very interesting lesson from this that is really hard to grasp, but it could change your life. And that is the fact that nothing in life is as important as you think it is when you are thinking about it. When your mind is focused on it, it really amplifies its importance compared to the entire rest of the time in your life. Our mood is largely determined by what we attend to and how we view it. We actively get pleasure or displeasure from our thoughts as we think them. It's easy to look at the weather and think that if we were in a better climate, that could be the key to our happiness. But actually, we care even more about things like our career or our love life or the bills we have to pay, our family, our friends. Even though in the moment we forget about all those very important things and instead we focus on the weather. Besides forgetting about all those other things that are going on in that moment as we focus on that one issue at hand, we also forget about all the other things that are important over the time span of our life. and we fail to use any kind of accurate reference point to how important this thing will be compared to the rest of our life. It's easy to look at a 10-year-old whose friends kind of suck, and for us to know that it doesn't matter. They will grow up and they won't even remember those idiots. But in the moment, it feels so important for them. And it's easy to see a worker who's stressing out over a report for their boss and working all weekend, and know that in a year's time, they won't remember what was in the report or why they were doing it. In fact, life feels like we are racing through it where whatever we are doing this year, that is the peak of importance of everything that will happen in our life. All the stuff in the future will be more chill after we've fixed this year's important thing. And of course, everything that we've already done, even if we thought it was important at the time, we now know wasn't that important. And this happens our entire life. As kids, we're told we have these super important exams coming up that will determine the rest of our lives. Then we have to get into the right university, and if we do that, that will determine the rest of our lives. Then you have to get a good grade at university so you can get a good job for the rest of your life. And it's always the rest of your life hanging on it. Like the rest of your life will be easy if you put all of your energy into obsessing over this one thing right now. But then once you have the job, you have to keep the job and you have to advance in the job. And then you have to find a partner and maybe have babies. And then you also have to keep the job at the same time whilst advancing at it so you can pay for the babies. But then you also have to think about your mental health and your parents' health and look after your own physical health and just really try not to die whilst carrying on looking after your babies and not letting them die. And as they get older, you shouldn't mess up their mental health either. And it just keeps on stacking, and it's just more and more important things forever until, of course, you do finally die and perhaps find some rest. So actually, looking at that, what's more important is not worrying about it all too much and just approaching stuff sensibly as you're doing it, trying your best, but also enjoying the ride as it happens because you only live once. When we forecast our future happiness, we really overestimate the effect that a specific change in our current environment will have. Like, if I get a promotion or a qualification, or if I go to a holiday destination, then I'll be happier. But in reality, you will still be you. And how good you are at being happy in the moment will be so much more important on your level of happiness anywhere than the effect of any of those external things. In reality, we overestimate how transient thoughts and feelings we will experience in our future mind. And the fact that we'll just get used to whatever the new environment is almost instantly, and then we'll find new problems to worry about. So to achieve happiness, the task is not to fix all the specific worries that will just pop up faster and faster like a game of whack-a-mole. Instead, it's about worrying less. And that is a very big topic, and this is already a very long episode. So I will address overthinking in a fully dedicated episode for it. For now, it's worth remembering that although your mind has all of these cognitive biases and heuristics, they can be changed. Like Neo in The Matrix, you have to realize that some rules can be bent and others can be broken. Another thing that we repeatedly find in psychology is that the source of all our problems is always inside us. The mountain to climb is our own internal struggles rather than external problems. As Morpheus says, you have to let it all go. Fear, doubt, and disbelief. Free your mind. And you might respond like Neo does at a different point where it's like, what are you trying to tell me? Are you saying that I can dodge bullets? The reply, of course, is no. I'm trying to tell you that when you're ready, you won't have to. Okay, well, always nice to wrap up on a Morpheus quote. And if you found the episode fascinating, then I would, of course, recommend digging into the whole book by Daniel Kahneman on thinking fast and slow. It is so full of wisdom, it's insane that much wisdom is in a book. It is a bit of a project. The full book is over 300,000 words and the audiobook is well over 20 hours long. But it's written very well and is incredibly fascinating. It's not like a Malcolm Gladwell pop psychology super easy read. It has a lot going on. And unlike some books that could have been a blog post, Thinking Fast and Slow could have actually been 3 books. But I would recommend anyone to take it on if they want to understand more of their own delusions in their head, how the world works, and a few lessons on happiness. But I would say that the book is a perfect case for my sponsor Shortform, who do book summaries based on knowledge density. So They do have a 6-page version that is only 15 minutes to listen to of Thinking Fast and Slow, but they have a much deeper 84-page version that's 3.5 hours long to listen to. And it's analysis of all the concepts and is like the length of a normal book because of Fast and Slow is such a long book. But as I've read both the full book and the short form version, I can say it was genuinely very good and also has some updated science and references to other findings in some of its sections. So actually, in some ways, it's a bit more up to date. And yes, as a listener of the show, you can have a free trial and 20% off using the promo code psychology, and a link is in the description. But yeah, I hope that didn't come across too salesy. I just was really impressed with how good the summary was, because Thinking Fast and Slow was one of the hardest books I've had to read. And Daniel Kahneman really worked for like decades putting the whole thing together, which shows. Anyway, as always, this is a podcast. If you are feeling generous, then a kind review goes a long way to inflating my ego. And also, as humans, we are full of these fun decision heuristics, as we've mentioned, and a very well-rated podcast does make the decision to listen a little bit easier for others. Much more importantly, though, remember that life is too short to judge everything at surface value and have a lazy system 2 operating in our mind. So smile at strangers, however weird they look. And don't forget that it's easy to get lost worrying about the future, regretting the past, but the only thing that is truly real in life is right here, right now, in this very moment. So remember to do the little things that improve your day-to-day experience in the real world and make your existence as it happens that little bit better. As L'Oreal says, you're worth it. Thank you so much for listening.
Go you!
Your consistency to reach the end of an episode is legendary.
My hero!
But when we learn things, it's important to reflect. So I politely invite you to take a pause, rifle through the biggest ideas you just heard. So here's your opportunity to hit pause and have a think. Okay, did you wrestle with some insights? Information doesn't stick when we race from one podcast to the next without using our brain to play with the knowledge. So here's another go at a pause. Alrighty, I'll let you off to continue with your life now. If you have any ideas or feedback for the show, I'm always interested to hear from you.
You're the best!
And other than that, please stay curious. Curious. Quote. Smiling for no reason.